Subcommittee will come to order. Secretary Driscoll, General LaNeve, welcome to both of you. I want to start by acknowledging the men and women of the U.S. Army working every day to defend our country and confront our allies. Their jobs are very dangerous, but absolutely essential. And the sacrifices of 272 soldiers wounded and the 7 who gave their lives in Operation Epic Fury will certainly not be forgotten. They are, of course, only the latest service members to be killed by Iran in its decades-long war against America. Hopefully, this will be the last. The subcommittee's job is to make sure that soldiers under your command are equipped to deter and, if necessary, defeat threats to our global interests wherever they arise. And the substantial increase in top-line spending in the fiscal 27 request certainly gives us the opportunity. However, the reliance of this budget request on one-time reconciliation spending is really quite a risky approach. And the Army's budget illustrates the risk pretty clearly. The majority of the funds the Army requires for critical munitions have been requested by OMB as mandatory spending instead of base discretionary spending. $24 billion of the $36 billion the Army spends on replenishing stocks of precision fires and interceptors would come as a one-time slug of cash. And that's assuming reconciliation passes at all. These funds would have no protection against the short-term continuing resolutions that have become the norm at the beginning of each fiscal year. Munitions are now ostensibly a top priority of the administration. The Deputy Secretary has rightly devoted enormous attention and resources to the problem. One we should all know took many years to create, and it's going to take years of consistent funding to solve. And yet barely a third of the total munitions investments required by the Army are built into the full baseline budget. For all the talk about sending a clear demand signal to industry, it strikes me as an unnecessary risk. And I'll need to hear more from you about how this approach can possibly align with the long-term task ahead of us of restoring munitions in the industrial base in our country. The nature of modern warfare is changing. Recent events in the Middle East suggest the U.S. military may not be adapting as quickly as necessary. That said, I appreciate the Army's efforts to identify and apply the lessons learned from Ukraine to the Middle East. So, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your willingness to call it like you see it, and I think you were absolutely right to identify the battlefield innovation taking place in Ukraine. It's the Silicon Valley of warfare. Likewise, members of the subcommittee were recently briefed by General Chris Donahue and Lieutenant General Curtis Bazard. It was clear they, too, understand the path to drone dominance runs through partnership with the world's foremost experts in drone warfare, the Ukraine. This fact is so clear that it's difficult to understand why more senior officials at the Pentagon, particularly those directly responsible for Ukraine policy or military modernization, have followed the example of you and General George set back in November by actually seeing the battle lab of technical and industrial innovation firsthand. Haven't been there. Regrettably, General George was recently fired and understood both of these innovating, reform-minded combat veterans sadly are set to retire. Pretty clear to me that America doesn't stand to gain from opting out of the latest battlefield lessons or the sort of cooperation with Ukraine on drone technology that our allies in the Gulf are urgently embracing. And making modest investments in this cooperation to ensure that U.S. soldiers have access to the latest battle-proven lessons in technology as they forge new doctrine seems like money well spent to me. That's why I'm concerned that the vast majority of funds the Department requested for drone and counter-drone capabilities would once again come in the form of one-off reconciliation, which may not pass. If adapting to this reality of modern warfare is a priority, as department leaders say it is, then we ought to prove it by making room in a full base budget. I want to hear from you about how the Army values ties with capable partners like Ukraine, and about what our troops get out of engagement with frontline NATO allies as well. These relationships repay U.S. investments and then some, but they're under strain unnecessarily. Threats to allies like Denmark and surprise force posture changes that affect model host allies like Poland are self-defeating. So, Mr. Secretary General, I look forward to hearing your views on these and other topics. We'll turn to you momentarily for opening statements. Let me turn first to Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman McConnell, and thank you, Secretary Driscoll and General LaNeve, for appearing here today. The Army's total budget request for the upcoming fiscal year is $253 billion, a nearly 30% increase over last year. Let me agree with the Chairman at the outset that as we reflect on Memorial Day and the service and sacrifice of generations of men and women of the United States Army, I too am grateful for those who fall in service to our nation. I'm from a family with a long tradition of Army service. My father, my uncles, my brother, my sister-in-law. One might ask what I'm doing on this side of the microphone, as they often did. And I am eternally grateful for the role the United States Army has played in fighting for and securing our freedom over the 250 years of our republic. As we as a subcommittee better analyze and try to understand this budget request, I want to focus on a few things. The focus of senior leadership in the Army, our work with allies and our posture in critical priority theaters, drone and counter-drone technologies and munitions. In each of these areas, in both budget and policy, I see reason to be encouraged and reasons to be deeply troubled, and I'll speak to both. As for leadership focus, Secretary Driscoll, you've brought real energy and new thinking to the Army, and the imperative to adapt is palpable, and I commend you for that. At the same time, the Secretary of Defense has fired abruptly and without explanation, and in my view, without cause, General Randy George, a decades-long respected senior leader, and many others. And my concern is that other effective senior officers seem on their way to retirement rather than further leadership. To Acting Chief of Staff LaNeve, I look forward to working with you in your new role. But my first point here is I'm deeply concerned that some of our most experienced uniformed officers are being forced out without cause or explanation, and that the senior ranks are constantly having to look over their shoulder rather than being evaluated on the merits of their progress. The recent firing of the Chief of Chaplains, Major General William Green, is something that also caused me great concern. I've had no explanation. This has never happened in our nation's history. Secretary Driscoll, I've been encouraged by your recent comments in other hearings about the centrality of Ukraine in shaping and determining the future of warfare, and I'm heartened to hear your emphasis on the importance of ensuring our military supports those innovations and integrates them into our arsenal, our training, and our doctrine. This is urgent, in my view. But cutting against those goals, the administration is pressing for Ukraine to surrender at the negotiating table that which Putin can't achieve on the battlefield. I think we are undermining our own position of partnership with Ukraine. In recent weeks, our presidents continued to send damaging signals to our allies and, worse yet, encouraging signals to our adversaries. Inexplicably, the administration announced the abrupt withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Germany and followed this up with another announcement: we would be halting the deployment of a rotational brigade to Poland, a crucial partner in Europe's eastern flank that has dramatically stepped up its investment in our shared security. Congress was not consulted. According to some press accounts, neither was Poland. So we still do not understand whether these announcements are distinct or connected and what the timing and posture was. I think most importantly, it sends the worst possible signal to Russia about our commitment, our competence, and our combat power. And this isn't just a question of numbers. It's about capabilities. The Army has also quietly turned off a long-range fires battalion scheduled to deploy to Germany this summer, a key element of our ongoing deterrence. You know as well as I do, our presence in Europe and our relationship with our European allies is crucial to deterring Russia. For anyone who questions whether Russia is our adversary, let me review some recent facts. Russia is actively aiding and abetting Iran in targeting and killing U.S. service members, passing weapons, targeting assistance, intelligence, and broader support. Russia is giving North Korea critical lifelines and some critical technology. And we know that the degree of cooperation with our chief adversary, China, is steadily increasing. The administration has lagged in spending funding appropriated on a bipartisan basis to the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. A week ago, I asked Secretary Hegseth in this subcommittee for an update on the spend plan, was promised we would receive it within that week, and it hasn't happened. So any update you can provide on this directed appropriation that on a bipartisan basis members of this committee have raised over and over would be welcome. It is overdue. In the context of this administration's attacks on NATO and with Russia's heightened threats to our interests, these decisions make no sense to me. Funding requests for drone and counter-drone technology have increased, which I welcome. The Army's recently launched a creative drone marketplace, and units are beginning to experiment with this vital new way of warfare. But most of the funding, as the chairman noted, is in reconciliation outside of base budget, and I'm unclear how much of this new procurement is occurring. I look forward to learning how the Army is going to use these funds to build a broader drone industry ecosystem and how it plans on quickly driving new counter-drone UAS protections across its forces. I think this is one of our most urgent missions. Last, on munitions, rethinking our approach to munitions has been a feature of this subcommittee since the early days of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. All of us support multi-year procurements, especially for the Patriot PAC-3 interceptor. But the request for these munitions in reconciliation is baffling to me. Why risk something so foundationally important in a partisan political process, the outcome of which is so uncertain? And in light of the high expenditure rates in our current conflict in the Middle East, how are we ramping production to accommodate our needs alongside those of our vital and trusted partners and allies? We also have to discuss the looming multi-billion-dollar shortfall in Army military personnel and O&M accounts, operations and maintenance accounts. There's multiple reasons for this, and I look forward to talking through this. But last, the Army's also been ordered to divert personnel for DH missions here at home. All of us who spend time here in Washington see guardsmen. They're performing as ordered, but they're often doing nothing more urgent than picking up trash. I'd rather have them in Europe, making Putin second-guess his strategy. The Army's budget and its near future are full of contradictions. I find some puzzling, some troubling, alongside flashes of brilliance and decisions that give me confidence and optimism. Ultimately, the fiscal year 27 request is just that, a request. And I hope this dialogue and the work of this subcommittee will help shape it in a way that meets our Article I responsibilities for the year ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Now let's have brief opening statements from both of you. Going first, Ms. Secretary.
Chairman McConnell, Ranking Member Coons, distinguished members, it's a privilege to address you today. After a year in this position, I am prouder than ever to represent our soldiers and their families. As all of you know, our soldiers are the very best in the world. They're bold, decisive, and they can overcome anything when we properly enable them. That's why I spent over 130 days on the road, across 19 countries and 25 states, to hear directly from them. I ate with them, put hands on their equipment, and had candid conversations with soldiers of every single rank. What I heard was clear. Our soldiers are ready to innovate and win, but our own bureaucracy and regulations are still holding them back. Getting what soldiers need to win and making the Army budget actually work for them is definitionally a bipartisan topic, and I know all of you agree with that. You have supported our Army for decades, and we wouldn't be here without you. But we know the system that should benefit soldiers remains broken. Quality of life and battlefield advantage aren't always the #1 budget priority. It's a simple fact, and we need your help to continue to change it. We need right-to-repair legislation, relief from pre-World War II laws, and significantly more budget flexibility. Thank you so much for last year's progress, but if we're going to win the next fight, we must go even further. Technological change is accelerating, warfare is evolving, and speed is absolutely critical. Your help to either help us lower barriers to innovation or stick to the decades-long status quo makes all the difference. I invite all of you to come see our transformation firsthand. We're partnering with private industry to adopt the best tech, talent, and tradecraft. We're inviting those partners onto our bases to unlock dormant resources and offset federal budget delays. We're blazing a trail for our nation on nuclear energy, counter-drone capabilities, and military AI. Despite red tape, we're delivering better dining, barracks, Wi-Fi, and 3D printed barracks. Even though it can feel like the deck is stacked against us, the United States Army is an absolute beacon of transformation. For instance, as we speak at this exact moment, we're hosting the largest hackathon in human history to retroactively jailbreak our siloed equipment. It's named Operation Jailbreak. Last month in Europe, soldiers showed me how our software systems are compartmentalized, isolated, and ineffective against modern threats. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Delta Common Operating System, their modular open system architecture command and control system, is absolutely incredible. It fully integrates every drone, every sensor, and every single shooting platform into just one single network. Ours does not. Unfortunately, for decades, our budget process incentivized companies to protect their intellectual property at all costs, creating walled gardens in our command and control infrastructure. This has been the status quo for far too long. It is no longer acceptable, and industry is actually helping us to solve it right now. I contacted 9 of our defense primes and other large partners who immediately agreed to send thousands of pieces of equipment, hundreds of engineers and scientists to Fort Carson. Together, we will force our way through the firewalls, link every single system, and achieve true right to integrate. And this is just our first sprint. We will do it again and again and again until we get it exactly right. And I want to be clear, this is the perfect example of our Army's potential for speed and innovation. No one else has the talent, the drive, and the obsessive work ethic like our soldiers to pull this off. Operation Jailbreak is the first of many sprints to bypass red tape and bureaucracy. What we're doing in Colorado should be the standard operating procedure across the entire federal government. It's the iterative process that makes America's tech sector the very best in the world. But you would be amazed at the regulatory walls that stood in our way. And we've expanded an absolutely sinful amount of energy just to do the right thing. Imagine what we can do if you continue to help us slash those restrictions. We can do more if you help us balance oversight with speed. We can maximize our budget if you help us partner with America's entrepreneurs. We can move faster if you help us shed obsolete equipment and invest in the future. And with your help, we can ensure our Army remains the dominant land fighting force for the next 250 years. Thank you so much for having us, and I look forward to answering your questions.
General, go ahead.
Chairman McConnell, Ranking Member Coons, thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee today. The credibility of our Army is defined by what it's prepared to do, not what it intends to do. So every decision I make enables our soldiers to be more lethal and ready to fight and win and serve as the backbone of the joint force. In the Indo-Pacific, we're building a force posture to deter threats to the U.S. national interest and designed to extend the operational reach and endurance of the joint force. Right now, 87,000 soldiers are campaigning throughout the region. Our Typhoon missile systems are forward deployed to the Philippines and Japan, and we position LTAMs in Guam and the IFPC unit in Korea, extending next-generation air and missile defense against current threats in the region. The 1st and 3rd multi-domain task forces are now operational in the region, and this fall, the 4th multi-domain task force headquarters will stand up at Fort Carson. Each of these MDTFs brings together long-range fires, intelligence, electronic warfare, space and cyber, all integrated into a single theater-level capability designed to support the Joint Force commanders across vast distances in the Pacific. Every one of these capabilities exists because of the investments this committee supported. In the Middle East, Army forces continue to defend U.S. personnel and partners while sustaining layered air and missile defense, long-range strike capability, and operational logistics across CENTCOM. And at home, we're preparing the force for future conflict at our combat training centers, where we train our soldiers to fight against an adversary in the mud, to solve complex problems, and to test our latest systems. But we cannot field modern kit while sustaining aging systems that consume time, money, and manpower. Divesting legacy platforms reduces the maintenance demand that falls hardest on our junior soldiers and frees resources to advance next-generation systems. That's why we are restructuring how we acquire, design, sustain, and field equipment, with a decisive focus on speed, the right to repair, and systems modularity. That thinking is already reflected in some of our next-generation platforms, like the XM-30 infantry fighting vehicle, the M1E3 Abrams, and the MV-75 Cheyenne, which provides unprecedented speed, range, and flexibility. And because of our Secretary, each of these systems are designed so that the next operational upgrade requires integration, not a completely new start. But none of this matters if we can't produce and sustain at scale. And this is why we continue to modernize our OIB through advanced manufacturing, depot modernization, expanded partnerships with industry, including enhanced use leases that accelerate infrastructure development and production capacity. And while industrial capacity is important, the strength of our Army is only as strong as our ability to retain experienced soldiers, and whether the force we're building reflects the standards we claim to uphold. That standard includes $4 billion in infrastructure investments through 2026. We're rolling out campus-style dining facilities, as the Secretary talked about. We're scaling our holistic health and fitness across the force. And soldiers are seeing the difference, and so do American citizens. Our recruiting numbers are soaring, and we're on track to achieve this year's accession target well ahead of schedule. Because in the end, soldiers are the reason your Army can do what it does. Your Army delivers the intelligence and fires that enable us to maneuver, we sustain operations, we protect the force, and we provide the command and control architecture that allows the joint force and America's allies to operate together. Every component of the joint fight depends on our Army's ability to do all those things simultaneously and exceptionally well, and we will not fail our country. This will defend, and thank you for your continued support as we sustain the best Army the world has ever seen.
Thank you, General. Obviously, history indicates the strongest form of deterrence is to say things like Reagan did on peace through strength, but not just say it, but back it up with your policies. The administration's focus on pushing allies and partners to increase their own military capacity would ostensibly enhance that sort of deterrence. That's all good news. General, you helped assist the Ukrainian military before Russia's escalation in 2022. Would earlier and more rapid U.S. assistance to Ukraine have enhanced deterrence and defense against Russia's full-scale invasion? And for both of you, if the PRC acts on its ambition to control Taiwan, it would threaten key American interests and disrupt the global economy. This is why there's been a strong bipartisan support to improve Taiwan's defensive capabilities. And while I'm kind of worried after the trip recently to China that arms sales to Taiwan are being delayed. So do you agree that helping Taiwan or the Philippines better defend their territory actually enhances deterrence? Are there lessons learned and capabilities demonstrated in Ukraine that are applicable to Taiwan or the Philippines?
Sir, first, thanks for the question, and I know we talked before about my participation, early on with the Ukrainians. I think talking about deterrence, anywhere that we have the ability to sustain campaigning across the Pacific, where we have our forces that can do access and presence, where we can maneuver our forces in and out of the theater to show different capabilities to not only our allies, but to display our capabilities and how fast we can be in the theater is always a form of deterrence for the enemy. We are taking, sir, and I want to make sure that this entire committee, fully understands, we are taking every single lesson learned as fast as possible from the Ukrainian battlefield and from the battlefield that's going on in OEF, and cycling that into our formations. We're using the lessons learned on our combat training centers. The Secretary is pushing us hard on getting the capabilities down to our soldiers as fast as possible in order to get hands-on so they can be as prepared to protect themselves and to be able to engage the enemy with this new technology at scale.
And Chairman, what I would echo from General LaNeve is the lessons we're taking are speed of maneuver matters more than ever. The dispersion, if you look at Ukraine, their ability to disperse their command and control, to disperse their fires matters. Long-range precision fires is something we as a nation are uniquely good at, and continuing to invest in that. And then the very last one is, if you look at contested logistics, when we are 6,000 miles from our home, data matters more than ever. And so when I was referencing Project Jailbreak, or Operation Jailbreak, those are the types of exercises that should set us up for success anywhere in the world, but including the Indo-Pacific.
Well, shifting to another part of the world, European allies are all dramatically increasing their defense spending. And traditionally, we've directed their spending toward American-made capabilities. Germany is on track to spend 5% of their GDP by 2035. Poland spends more as a share of GDP than anybody else in NATO. To what extent was the Army consulted on the canceled rotational deployment to Poland that was announced last week? How does surprising allies with abrupt changes to U.S. force posture, does that deepen or improve cooperation? And what is the status of sales of long-range strike capabilities which could serve to offset the capabilities of U.S. rotational forces to Germany or to Poland?
Chairman, we're working with our allies, particularly in Europe, very tightly on, as they increase their defense spending over the upcoming years, particularly because of President Trump's push. We are standing up marketplaces for counter-drone through our JIADA 401 that is actually in concert with them. And so we've come up with the rules and the protocols for information sharing with the Brits. We're inviting 23 other nations to this marketplace. And then our hope is that we're going to be able to expand it to include providers of supplies from all over the world. And so they're going to be able to list their own companies. We, the United States Army, will function like consumer reports. And this should be good for the entire industry globally, but particularly small and medium American businesses.
In short, there's nothing wrong with improving our situation with regard to Ukraine. I mean, we had difficulty confirming that the $400 million that we spent in this year's appropriation is actually going. I hope so. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just extend the question you were just asked. Last year, the Pentagon requested 0 for Ukraine and 0 for our Baltic allies. And on a bipartisan basis, this subcommittee put in hundreds of millions of dollars. The Secretary was in front of us a week ago. He promised us a spend plan within the week. We haven't received one. Do you have any update for us on progress towards spend plans for our Baltic Assurance Initiative and our Ukraine Assurance Initiative, which was, as asked of the Secretary in this chamber a week ago, the clear intention of this subcommittee?
Senator, I'll take the first swing if General LaNeve has any additional information. I think we know what is publicly available. We're obviously working with OSW frequently to come up with plans, including this spend plan. I can provide more specifics to your office after the hearing.
In other words, no, we don't have a spend plan that we're going to get this week either?
Sure, I can't answer for the OSW, but we'll, as the Secretary says.
I mean, I'll just be blunt. Like, we're here to talk about $236 billion. You share our perspective that Ukraine is the Silicon Valley of modern warfare. You're taking great steps to partner with them and to ingest their lessons and to deploy it. I don't know why this is something we've had to ask and ask and ask, and we can't get the spend plan. So please convey to the Secretary our shared sense of urgency about this. Let me just briefly ask about this force posture change in Europe and why. To the extent you can answer it, my sense is that there was an abrupt announcement of the withdrawal of 5,000 of our troops from Germany, and then shortly thereafter, an underway deployment of 4,000 to Poland was changed in some way, and then a change in terms of pre-positioning stocks. What's happening with our force posture in Europe and why?
So we're continually looking at the force posture across Europe. When you look at our Army pre-positioning stocks, we've been looking at that for years across not only just Europe, across the globe and where we have pre-positioned stocks. We've been looking at the force posture across Europe based off of the surge of rotational units, a couple years ago based off of the invasion. In consultation with the EUCOM commander, we talked about what forces that he was,
Were the Poles
recommending.
aware that this decision was being made?
So as a Title 10, I'm talking the force structure that we were pulling in out. I am not part of the discussions with our allies, and that's above a Title 10 requirement.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is nothing more than I've been able to get from press accounts. Congress was not consulted. By press accounts, our allies were not consulted. And I'm concerned that the lesson our allies is learning is that Chancellor Merz criticized our operations in Iran, and the president, in a fit of pique, announced withdrawal of 5,000 troops that had not previously been planned. Please disabuse me of this notion and help reassure me that this is part of a long-planned change in rotation. As I think you know, my brother served in the 2nd Armored. It is really hard to get pre-positioned stocks to places, whether it's the Western Pacific or Eastern Europe, in advance. I don't understand why there's been some alleged change in long-range fires or in pre-positioned stocks in Europe in a way that really puts at risk our deterrence of Russia.
Senator, one of the things under, and I mean this very sincerely and not sycophantically, under President Trump and Secretary of War Hexet's leadership, we have been relooking at pre-positioned stocks globally and how we think about when we send our sons and daughters to fight on our behalf, what tools and weapons can be in the theater for them. And so one of the reasons we were so excited about the JIADF marketplace is once you, and this sounds esoteric, but once you're able to have compatible equipment,
yes,
when our soldiers deploy, they can fall in on equipment from our allies,
okay,
and the allies can either send their people and their things or just their things. And so we are going after pre-positioned stocks.
Let me ask you about that. As we've discussed before, I was at the dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base for 3 Army reservists who were killed in the Tower 22 attack in 2024. I promised their families I'd take very seriously counter-UAS capabilities, particularly for forward deployed Americans, soldiers. And we worked together to give you budget flexibility. You're doing a lot in counter-UAS work. The JITAF 401 that you've referenced, the open market, I'm very encouraged by this. But your budget request for this effort is only $136 million out of $250 billion. And as I understand it, the Army's only buying one counter-UAS system when there's a wide range of possibilities. Help me understand why your FY27 request is focused on a single system. And of all the militaries in the world, the one most capable of intercepting Shahed drones seems to me to be the Ukrainians. We're in an ongoing war in Iran where all of the civilian and military infrastructure of our partners and allies is at risk of Shahed drones. Why not partner more closely with the Ukrainians on Shahed interceptors?
Senator, to the last bit of your remark, we've purchased 13,000 MIROPS since the start of the conflict.
Yep.
Our understanding, and I talk to the Ukrainians very frequently, is qualitatively that is, if not their favorite interceptor, then one of the top 2 or 3. We have flown 13,000 into theater over the last couple of weeks. We've had Ranger Regiment and 82nd training, doing train the trainers. If and when a conflict kicks back off, we will have a number of new solutions in theater that all started from JIATA 401's kickoff 9 months ago.
Thank you. Last question. Your budget request reduces aircraft procurement by nearly half. It doesn't request any new Apaches, any new Chinooks, I think only one Black Hawk. And the Army request invests in modifications and assumes FMS sales. I understand part of what you're trying to do is to rebalance legacy systems. But the Chinook is the only heavy vertical lift platform in the Joint Force. And the MV-75 is not a replacement for this capability. Am I correct? The Army has very few Block 2s in the Chinook fleet mix. What are the advantages of those Block 2s, and why stop buying Block 2s when we don't have a transition plan to an autonomous platform for this critical heavy lift function?
Sure, you're correct. Very few inside the inventory. And I know that the Secretary Higgs mentioned this last week, that he's taken an overall look again at our aviation strategy. We are as well taking a look at the decisions that were all made on the side of Angels. Do they still hold, as we go forward? We know we need the Cheyenne. We know that the 47, the Black Hawk, and the Apache are not legacy equipment. They're enduring. They're going to be in our fleet for many years. So we're taking a hard look at this to make sure that we've done the right decisions on how we're looking at that. And we'll come back to you, sir, and what we come back out with.
Because I think future acquisitions of Chinooks are key in order to sustain FMS cases. Our critical European allies, they need to see that we're doing this. All right, thank you very much.
Senator Collins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary General, welcome. I just want to associate myself with the remarks of the chairman and ranking member about Ukraine and the need for the spend plan, but also to learn the lessons from Ukraine's incredible success with counter-UAS and electronic warfare. I think that's extremely important. I want to refer to another lesson, Mr. Secretary, from Ukraine, and that is that the need for distributed autonomous systems operating alongside soldiers has become clear. At the same time, outside analysts and defense industry reporting now suggests that the Army remains years away from fielding autonomous ground systems at an operational scale. The Army has continued to publicly emphasize the autonomy, robotics, unmanned systems, human-machine teaming. All of those are central to the future battlefield. And yet, last year, as you know from our conversation, the Army made what I deem to be a very short-sighted and unfortunate decision to cancel the robotic combat vehicle program, including the RIPSAW platform developed in the state of Maine. Where does the Army's autonomous ground vehicle strategy stand today?
Senator, I agree with nearly all of your remarks on the future of warfare. And one of the things the United States Army has gotten wrong for a very long time is, and this goes back to these closed systems that just cannot share data outside of the system. And the reason that is so important is once something is, in this instance, drive-by-wire, we can take it and make it autonomous very quickly. And so we met a new company last year, about 14 months ago, called Applied Intuition, and they had never a single time worked with an Army vehicle. And we asked them how long would it take to make it autonomous, and they did it in 8 days. And so it's actually not a systematic problem within any of our future vehicles because they're open architecture. You can layer in software to control the vehicle very quickly. It is a legacy problem of how we used to design systems and overspend. And so specifically to what you're referencing, Senator, what we canceled, the other big lesson we're learning directly from Ukraine is we, in everything we purchase, have got to be on the right end of the cost curve, because if an $800 drone can destroy a thing very quickly and easily, even as the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, we just can't sustain it. And so one of the things we're very focused on is everything we purchase going forward being closer to attritable, where we can afford it as a nation to lose it to drones.
Well, I would say that it was the height of irony that when the Army was having its parade last year of the future, what did they have in it but the ripsaw?
When you made that remark, Senator, last year, I agree. It was very ironic.
So it seems to me that suggests there's a lot of value there. Let me switch to a different issue. General, I'm going to address this to you. The Berry Amendment was enacted to ensure that American troops are wearing American-manufactured uniforms made in the USA. That was originally passed in 1941. It was permanently enacted in 1994, and we expanded it to cover athletic footwear during my time in office. So there still is a continued exception to the Berry Amendment for combat boots that are purchased by a service member. Every other major component of the uniform must be American-made, and yet we continue to allow an exception for optional combat boots. In practice, this has allowed a growing share of the market to shift to foreign manufacturers and foreign supply chains. That completely undermines the whole intent of the Berry Amendment. Why are we continuing to allow for that exception? And can we work together to close this loophole and ensure that the combat boots worn with the U.S. military uniform are made in America?
Ma'am, the simple answer is yes. I commit to working with you and the team on how do we close this gap.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ervin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Secretary and General, being with us today. For more than 4 years now, the Ukrainian people have bravely fought on the front line of democracy against Russian aggression. Today, Putin continues to bomb and kill innocent civilians while ignoring President Trump's call for peace. I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary, for standing alongside Ukraine, for visiting the country, for highlighting its achievements on the battlefield, and for being a voice in support of security assistance. Ukraine has truly offered an incredible glimpse into modern warfare with notable ingenuity and agility developed with low-cost technology. Secretary Driscoll, can you elaborate on the value of U.S.-Ukraine cooperation and advancement in emerging technologies to prepare our own soldiers for battlefields in the future?
Absolutely, Senator, and the chairman referenced it in his opening remarks. We consider the Ukrainian battlefield the Silicon Valley of war. The United States Army has had, through SAGU and other groups, a relationship with the Ukrainians since the very beginning. General LaNeve was working with the Ukrainians well before things even kicked off. And what I can say is nearly every single thing we do as an Army, we pressure test against the idea of, will this work in the Middle East? could the Ukrainians use this in their theater? And if not, why are we pursuing it? There are different things about how we, the Army, have to prepare for a future conflict at a future spot where we don't know about. And so if that is in Southcom, if that's in the Indo-Pacific, if that's moving quickly through an urban area, there are tools we will need, like tanks, that are valuable in different settings than the kind of flot of Ukraine. And so we balance out that is not what all conflicts will look like. But the Ukrainians have done an incredible job of innovating at speed. They've done an incredible job of getting their private industry and some of their smartest, most talented people to come help their armed forces and their army. And we are trying to mimic and model out how to do that with our industry too.
Mr. Secretary, the U.S. currently is stationed and rotates forces through the Baltic states and Poland, countries on the front lines of Russian sabotage and belligerence, countries that are also far exceed their obligations under NATO. They've been true partners to the United States. And in fact, I'll never forget last year, Mr. Secretary, accompanying you to the dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base of 4 American soldiers who died in a tragic training exercise in Lithuania. In Vilnius the day before, the Lithuanian people came out and publicly mourned with us as these soldiers were returned home. This issue hit close to home as some of these soldiers were from my home state of Illinois. In fact, Poland is our partner in the Illinois National Guard, a relationship highly regarded. The U.S. troop presence in these countries is a strategic decision, one rooted in shared values between our nations. I'm deeply concerned as I learn about the administration's plans to reduce forces in this theater. And I wonder if you could tell me, if we walk away from our allies in that region, what is the plan for U.S. force posture in the world?
I can start and then hand it to my colleague. I just want to echo your remarks, Senator, on the Lithuanians. We still pray for those families of the fallen. It was devastating being at Dover with them and their family, or with their families and their friends. But the Lithuanians were incredible. Everyone I have seen that I know of since, I have thanked them. They wrapped their arms around our soldiers and their leadership and took us into their community. And so we are very grateful for that, General LaNeve.
Yes, sir. We have great relations with our partners, militaries, across Europe. Sir, I still think you'll see, based off of the Commander of EUCOM's movement of forces, you'll still see, forces that are actively participating inside of Poland with our allies. It won't be the Armor Brigade, but you still have, the second 2CR that's over there right now. We still have another ABCT. We still have a division headquarters that's forward deployed. That's part of the surge that went forward. We still have 5th Corps that's in Europe. So while one brigade is coming back, we still have a pretty big force presence from the United States Army in Europe.
Thank you, General. Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for visiting the Rock Island Arsenal last year. I asked you to do it, and you did it quickly, so quickly I couldn't go with you. But thank you anyway for visiting and for working with me over the past year to protect that Arsenal team from job cuts that may hurt our organic industrial base. Can you commit to protecting our OIB sites like Rock Island Arsenal from further job cuts?
Senator, I can commit to, we are actively focused on under President Trump to strengthen our industrial base, and Secretary Vorhex had mandated that we do that.
Does that include Rock Island Arsenal?
Rock Island Arsenal is the forefront of our advanced manufacturing push, which will be the future of how we do fights and logistics all over the world, and so absolutely.
I'm glad I came to this hearing. Thank you for your statement.
Murkowski, then Schutz, and then Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here and for your leadership. General LaNeve, I want to address my first question to you. Senator Collins and I were talking about the boot issue, and I was telling her we're certainly testing bunny boots in Alaska that are made in Alaska, so just putting that out. And when it comes to Arctic, you will have big bunny boots to fill. I remain a big fan of General Randy George. He was a guy who understood the Arctic. I think it says a lot that he chose to take his oath of office as the 41st Chief of Staff, not at the Pentagon, but out there at JBER, surrounded by the 11th Airborne. I thought that was pretty cool. But he really demonstrated to me, we were out in the field at an Arctic training exercise in February, the commitment and an understanding as to what it took to be engaged in Arctic warfare. And he has said that the Army had really, his words, really allowed our capabilities to atrophy in the Arctic, and now it was a catch-up game. And he was all in on what are we going to do with the level of innovation, how are we going to move this at literally warp speed here. So the question to you, General LaNeve, is we're looking at what Russia is doing. We see how China is accelerating. Outside experts say that we are doing catch-up in the Arctic. Does this budget, in your view, continue the Arctic investment strategy that I think General George put in motion, or are we holding back here?
Ma'am, we're definitely not taking a step back. And in fact, if I tried at all, there's a personal person that would kill me. My daughter's first assignment was in 125 up in Alaska. And thank you for your commitment and efforts to help us turn those two brigades that, always seemed like they were separate and not part of an organization, truly into a division that has a shared focus, a shared commitment, and you can see this spree there. And what we're learning from the training that's going on, whether it's an airborne operation or just trying to maneuver during the winter, it's going to help us throughout the Army, not just in winter or the Arctic conditions, but if you look at batteries and how fast batteries get depleted in the Arctic, that's the same thing that happens in the jungle. So there's a lot of corollaries to it, but really to answer your question, we're not stepping away from it because we know it's going to be a critical battleground in the future.
Well, they say that if you can figure out how to fight there, you can figure it out just about anywhere, and I would certainly agree with that. I want to follow on the chairman's comments as well as that of the ranking member when it comes to this budget request and the fact that a quarter of the budget, $37.7 billion, depends on a reconciliation package that is yet to be divined, to be decided. It's already queued in line behind other legislative priorities. And there's important stuff in it, like in that $37.7 billion, 830 of the Army's 857 requested THAAD interceptors. We've got the PAC-3 MSE Patriot interceptors jumping nearly 9 times from 357 rounds to over 3,200. So it's important what is in that proposed reconciliation. But we're also waiting on the forthcoming Iran war supplemental, which we anticipate will have significant funding requests for munitions restock. So kind of walk me through kind of the governing principle here, if you will. What goes in the base budget? What goes in reconciliation? What goes in the supplemental? And is that distinction being driven by actual military requirements or by what you think might be able to pass this legislative body?
Senator, I think as you and your colleagues know much better than us, we work across the services hand in hand with OSW to come up with this plan. We agree wholeheartedly with all of you that the reconciliation portion, the supplemental portion, all of it is critical for our national security. And our personal commitments is to work with any office so that it is not a partisan exercise, but instead all of you can see the bipartisanship with which I think we put together this plan.
Do we have a plan B in the chance that there is not a third reconciliation?
Senator, we can follow up with your office on the specifics.
Okay, because as I look to what's included, it's kind of important stuff. And so helping us understand our role here on the Appropriations Committee and how this maps forward, I think is important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Schatz, Kennedy, and then Murphy.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, good to see you. I wanted to follow up our ongoing conversation about the lease negotiations. I know you're in constructive dialogue with the governor and his administration. I want to just sort of set the tone here and make sure we're on the same page, at least conceptually. Obviously, deals have to be negotiated, but I think the first thing is, do you want a deal with the state government done in a collaborative fashion?
Unequivocally, Senator.
Okay. And there are a couple of things that are happening right now. First of all, I think a deal is possible. I want to say that. But the state of Hawaii, up until now, has provided state lands for Army training for free. And that's just not a reasonable deal. And so it's true that the Department of War, the Department of the Army, has a legal right to adversely condemn property that they deem in the national security interests of the United States. That is the kind of thing that sounds easy in Washington and would create lots of difficulty back home, because what we have underlying this relationship is a cooperative attitude between state government, county government, and the federal government in this instance. And there are very few instances of the Army or the Department of War condemning state property. It happened in New York, it happened in Puerto Rico. In both instances, those are moments in history, and they're not good ones, right? And they weren't good for the Department of War. And so I would just like to hear from you that you'd like to avoid that outcome of adverse condemnation. Not that you take it off the table. I know that you don't want to take anything off the table when we're still in a negotiation, but I'd like to hear that that's not where you're sort of barreling towards.
Happy to, Senator. I first always try to say this, and I mean it very sincerely. If you talk to any soldier, and I'm sure General LaNeve could echo this, who has been stationed in Hawaii with their families, they get embraced by that community, unlike almost anywhere else our soldiers go. It's one of the most requested places, not just because it's beautiful, but because the community is so good to them. And that trust and relationships takes decades to build up. And so we are incredibly grateful. The second one is I don't want to underestimate the importance of that training land for our national security and how important it is for the Indo-Pacific. When we reference Alaska and how important it is for our soldiers to get to train there, the triple canopy that 25th ID gets to do impacts how we create our TTPs and will make us stronger in the future. But to your specific question, Senator, the governor's team, your federal delegation, have advocated incredibly tirelessly for the people of Hawaii. We want to come to the most fair resolution as quickly as possible so that we can continue to maintain the relationship with the community and have this national security asset.
Okay, in the interest of continuing the negotiation, but as we say, hard on the issues, easy on each other, I want to just flag a couple of issues. First, there's sort of chatter about a provision in the House mark of the Defense Authorization Bill. And I think that is very likely unwise, because we're talking about one chamber, one party. And if we're going to do anything with the Hawaii Congressional Delegation, we've got 2 defense appropriators and 2 defense authorizers. We should all be in the room and know what the heck is being contemplated as ledge text is being sort of transmitted back and forth. And if it's not, then we should know that that's not what's happening. That's number one. Number two is, as we think about the remuneration to the state government, right? It's a lease. You got a lessee and a lessor, and the lessor should get something for the lease. You agree with that. Now we have to talk about the details. It's just important to not move anything to the left on the MILCON list, on the unfunded priorities list. So think of this as a proper community benefits package. As you know, I've been on this committee for a while now, and I'm happy to advocate for increased defense spending generally, Army spending in particular, in the state of Hawaii. However, when you're talking about a lease negotiation, like us doing MILCON and moving it to the left, or buying down the UFER list, is not going to be something that we can honestly convey is a community benefits package. So as we're contemplating how to make the community whole and maintain that level of cooperation. There's some people who believe the Department of Defense just doesn't belong in the state of Hawaii. Those people will never be satisfied. There are some people who think that the Department of Defense should not give anything to the state of Hawaii. Those people will never be satisfied. But the middle wants a fair deal, and that fair deal would not include just increased Army spending on Army stuff, but rather a kind of compensation for the ability to use the lands at PTA, and PMRF, and elsewhere. Thank you.
Kennedy, Shea, Baldwin.
Gentlemen, welcome. My biggest surprise from the summit between Presidents Trump and Xi was how open and notorious President Xi was with respect to his insecurity about Taiwan. I mean, before, during, after the summit, he basically said, America, President Trump need to leave Taiwan alone. Taiwan is ours. And President Xi has this reputation built up by many members of our media as being this master negotiator. I found that surprising. It's understandable. America has learned how to fight again. And I'm sure President Xi is looking at what President Trump did in Venezuela and Cuba and Iran and the Sahel and Yemen. Be that as it may, Mr. Xi has demonstrated and telegraphed his insecurities. That gives us leverage. Doesn't that argue for us to go forward with an arms sale to Taiwan and others after it? General, let me ask you first, or Secretary, whoever wants to answer.
Senator, the portion of it that I would strongly and very vehemently disagree with is that in any instance where President Trump is, he would concede anything unnecessarily. And so
I didn't ask that. If you can't answer, tell me, because I don't want anybody to get fired. It just seems to me, I was surprised that President Xi was so obvious in his insecurity. He's worried about Taiwan. He's worried about America supporting Taiwan. If we want stability, we're not going to get it by being nice to Xi. We're going to get it by making him respect our strength. Don't you think that argues for us to go forward with arms sales to Taiwan?
Senator, I can say that under this budget, this $1.5 trillion budget, we will be in an even stronger position to
That's not what
defend
I'm
our
asking,
allies.
Mr. Secretary.
It's a policy question that is above my Title
okay.
X authority, Senator.
All right, well, let me ask you, let me shift direction. I don't think you have to be Einstein's cousin to figure out what we ought to do next in terms of establishing deterrence, but maybe that's just me. Is Russia our friend?
No.
Between Ukraine and Russia and the war they're fighting, who do we want to win?
Ukraine.
Okay. Isn't it a fact? Well, strike that. What's the most powerful army in Europe?
Sure, I'd say anywhere the United States soldier is.
I understand, other than the United
States.
States. What's the most powerful European army?
It's probably between Russia and, some of our allies have some incredible army service.
Ukraine,
some
isn't it?
incredible capabilities.
It's Ukraine, isn't it?
Sir, Ukraine has done an incredible job against an aggressor.
Don't you find it breathtaking, General, what they've done? They started with nothing.
I do find it breathtaking.
And they're producing 200 drones a day in addition to cruise missiles to reach into Russia. They've taken out 40% of Russia's ability to export its oil. I just find, and they started with nothing. I remember when all the experts, who are almost always wrong, so Russia's going to move in on Ukraine. They're going to roll in like thunder on a summer night. It'll be over in 2 days. And now Ukraine has turned the tide. Why don't we support taking those $200 billion of Russian assets in Europe that we have seized and getting that money to Ukraine? And let's win this thing, or at least get Putin into a position where he'll negotiate a settlement. Would you support that?
Again, Senator, my Title X authorities, that's a policy question outside of our lane.
I mean, it just seems so. I'm not talking about federal money. There's $200 billion sitting there. Heck, there's UK. There's $31 billion in the UK alone. France, President Macron, swell guy. He's always giving us advice and fussing at us. France is sitting on $22 billion. Why don't they give that to Ukraine? They'll use the money to buy some of our weapons. It's just sitting there. If we want to win, why don't we support taking the $200+ billion and saying, here, Ukraine, here's the money. Go whip their ass. You don't want to answer that, do you, guys? I understand. I get it. I went over. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Shane, Capito, Baldwin, and Boson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me begin by thanking both of you for being here and associating myself with the remarks of Senator Kennedy with respect to Ukraine, and point out that if the administration would just put the sanctions back on the oil, it would stop Russia from gaining $4 billion a month that they're using to put into Ukraine. And I would just say, Secretary Driscoll, that in fact, as the Secretary of the Army, you are a policy person. And while you may not want to answer that question, and I understand that if you want to bump that to the President, but to say that you're not responsible for policy, I think is not an accurate description. But I want to ask you, because the last time you were both, we had an exchange, it was before the Armed Services Committee, and I asked you about the drawdown of the troops from Germany, and then walked out of that hearing and heard that the administration had just decided to cancel a deployment of 4,000 troops to Poland. And I just wondered if you or anyone in the administration contacted our Polish allies about that troop withdrawal, if they knew that was coming, and if you, either of you were asked about your advice with respect to whether that cancellation should be done.
Ma'am, thank you for the question. As I stated earlier, I was in consultation with the EUCOM commander on what force it would be as the Title X, and what would come out, and my recommendation to him as well. But notification to our partners. I'm the Title X. That's not something that's in my purview. If General Grinkovich did that as the EUCOM commander, if that was done inside the OSW policy.
And Senator, I would say the services are, this is not intended to be an answer that's hiding the ball, but instead very accurately, we are constantly and frequently talking about our force posture all over the world throughout the year with policy and OSW leadership in the administration. And so we are regularly involved in conversations.
But it just struck me that we had just had an exchange about the fact that it would be okay to draw down those troops from Germany because we were going to be rotating troops in, and then there was no effort to address what was happening in Poland. It seemed like a decision that was not thought through. So that's why I wondered if you were asked. And I think it's the reason that in the NDAA last year, the Congress mandated consultation before the administration can remove U.S. forces in Europe below 76,000 for longer than 45 days, because there is real concern about what not with respect to what the two of you are saying, but about what this administration is planning in terms of the drawdown from Europe. And isn't it true that one of the important reasons to have pre-positioned equipment, we had this exchange at SASC as well, is because it allows us to have more rapidly assemble troops if we need to go into the Middle East or go someplace else, if we have the ability to have that pre-positioned equipment.
So, ma'am, we've been looking at our pre-position force structure for a while. And really, the analysis, to take a look at it, do you keep it as a pre-positioned force that, you only break, when you break glass when you need to use it? Or do you change the way we look at that force as training sets that could be spread
Right.
out that you could fall in, which breaks it up? It's a less of a target. You'll still be able to utilize them. But the most important part is you can continually upgrade those systems so they can talk to each other.
And as we said at that SASC hearing, I think that makes sense, but we're not doing that either, as I understand.
No, ma'am, we are taking a look at that. That was part of the overall look.
So
at
we're
the process.
studying it, is what you're telling me.
Yes, ma'am. We're looking at how we can make these sets, the ability, as you and I talked before, to be able to get on them, to be able to use them, to reduce the amount of money it costs to move equipment back
Well,
and forth.
I look forward to hearing the outcome of that study. I want to ask one more question before my time is over, and that is, this came up at that SASC hearing as well, but Secretary Driscoll, U.S. Army in Europe took a decrement of $155 million in FY26 funding because of non-reimbursable support to the Department of Homeland Security. At last week's hearing, you testified that you had not been reimbursed for that. I assume you still have not been reimbursed for that amount.
Senator, I was able to talk to Secretary Mullen yesterday at the White House in person. He is with the Pentagon leadership today, this morning. They were meeting on it. As of yesterday, I believe, and I will commit to following up with your office if this is not correct, it is all on track for reimbursement soon.
Can you get back to this committee relative to the timetable for when that reimbursement is going to get done?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Capito, Baldwin, and Boson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Driscoll, for being here. You stated in your opening statement that the Army's combat training centers need to provide training that is tough, realistic, and relevant to modern threats. As you know, much of our current training infrastructure is dated, overscheduled, and concentrated in Western desert environments. That's why I supported the funding for the East Coast Warfare Center. It is in former industrial sites in southern West Virginia to create a more agile, low overhead cost, government and industry accessible test bed in challenging terrain in our southern part of our state. Secretary Driscoll, will you commit to having the Army review how the East Coast Warfare Center could complement your combat training center reform and how it could fill gaps in threat representative training, mission rehearsal, counter UAS, and electronic warfare?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Can you describe where you think this would fill the gaps for you, this East Coast Warfare Center?
Current training environments, like you said, Senator, are inadequate for the risk and the threat. And if you look back to Ukraine and you look at how difficult it is to move and to avoid being seen and to be dispersed enough to survive, the number and variety of training centers that we can create where we can layer in things like electronic warfare and contested electromagnetic environments is crucial for our country. And so what you're describing as part of a constellation of new solutions would be, I think, from my understanding, pretty impactful.
Yes, General, would you like to comment on that, please?
Ma'am, anytime we can provide a spot for our soldiers to see something new for the first time, to innovate there, to learn how they would react in different environments, different settings, is good for us in our readiness building. I commit, as well as the Secretary, to reviewing that.
Let me ask you this. Because everything's changing and has changed so quickly in terms of the type of warfare, type of weapons being used, the technologies that are required as that. Does that mean that the training for these types of either on a defensive or offensive posture is moving just as fast, or does it take? Do you see what I'm saying? How long does it take to reposition the troops in terms of skills?
Ma'am, I think you would be very, very happy with your Army. We're taking the lessons learned, not only from Ukraine, we're taking the lessons learned on the current battlefield, and we're incorporating as fast as we can in our training scenarios at our combat training centers. That's the first one. The second one is we're continually look at our force structure. And we just had a session yesterday of inside of our brigade combat teams, where do we want to have the emphasis in the capabilities? You're going to have protection at the lowest level, and that's something that we owe our soldiers. But we're looking across the board at where do we have the ability to put assets into the formations that they can use for lethal. And we're looking at that based off of all the lessons learned. I think you'd be really proud of your Army.
Yeah. Mr. Secretary?
And Senator, I would say our soldiers, our talent is incredible. Where we, and I mean this as the civilians, are getting in their way is not letting them procure commercially available solutions fast enough. And so I have frequently said, and if you say it to a group of soldiers, they all nod immediately, that we should not ask them to step back in time 20 or 30 years when they put on their uniform. The iPhone in their pocket should not be more powerful than the tools we're giving them. The drones that they're able to go buy at Hobby Lobby or whatever the place where they shop is should not be more effective and efficient than what we give them for military-grade solutions. And the systematic failures of our bureaucracy over the last 20 and 30 years still need to be broken down. And I very sincerely mean to thank this committee and your colleagues for helping us in the past year, but we can go a lot faster.
Yeah, so we're talking about technology. I think one of the things, and you and I talked about this, Mr. Secretary, is the Catalyst Pathfinder program where the from the bottom up, so to speak, any innovative solutions can be created by the users of the technology or the users of the warfare. And, soldiers always have really good ideas because just like in private industry and manufacturing, there are improvements made at the lower level for, stress fractures or whatever during manufacturing of certain materials. So I would like to talk about that. Last year's NDAA included language requiring the Catalyst Pathfinder program to be included in the Army divisions and to be incorporated. I mean, things with 3D printing and maker spaces. Do you have a comment on that, Mr. Secretary?
Senator, I think this is the future of how we are going to learn the most is from our soldiers. And I say this as somebody that got out of the military after 3.5 years, did the fancy school thing, worked in finance, have been around talented people. But I would bet on the American soldier every single time innovating us to the most successful outcome. And so these maker spaces you're talking about, we have done them not haphazardly, but with less of a strategic enterprise level plan than we should have. We are actively investing more time into creating a plan to scale across all of our divisions because I am in wholehearted agreement.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you both.
Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Driscoll and General LaNeve, thank you both for being here today. On March 1st, an Iranian drone strike in Kuwait killed 6 soldiers of the 103rd Sustainment Command and injured dozens of others, including several from Wisconsin. Earlier this morning, CBS News reported that in the days prior to the March 1st drone strike, members of that unit requested additional medical supplies. Soldiers from the 103rd Sustainment Unit said that request was denied by the Army. These same soldiers then said that some of those medical supplies could have potentially saved the lives of some of the soldiers who had to be treated at civilian hospitals in Kuwait because there was not adequate military medical care available to them. In February, Secretary Driscoll, why did the Army deny providing additional medical supplies to the soldiers of the 103rd Sustainment Command in Kuwait?
Senator, I don't know the specifics of the CBS story you're referencing from this morning, but commit to following up with your office.
Okay. So will you commit to looking into whether such a request was denied? And will you follow up both with me and my office and this subcommittee once you've done so?
Yes.
Okay. The article also quotes soldiers from the unit who say that they did not receive adequate training on how to respond to a mass casualty attack before March 1st. Did all Army units receive such medical training prior to the beginning of Operation Epic Fury?
Ma'am, so we prepare our soldiers before we deploy them, and then there's rehearsals that are done in theater. I'd have to come back to you, and I commit to doing that, but that's a question for Admiral Cooper, CENTCOM, and its subordinate commander there for the Armory Central to go over what drills that they conducted throughout the theater. But I'll follow back up with you in the committee.
Please do. I want to turn to how the Army has changed efforts to protect soldiers from drone attacks like that in Kuwait as a result of the war with Iran and the Russia-Ukraine war. With U.S. assistance, the Ukrainians have become some of the best fighting forces in the world at shooting down drones. Yet when Operation Epic Fury began in February, our soldiers did not have the necessary equipment or training to stop the threat of Iranian drones. The Army initially relied on advanced missile and air defense systems, but these systems are limited in number and cannot protect soldiers everywhere. So why were our soldiers unprepared for the threat of Iranian drones despite our collaboration with Ukraine, and what lessons have you learned for the future?
Senator, very sincerely, I appreciate your line of questioning because this is exactly what we should all be caring about and what me in this role do care about. And I'm through JIATA 401, the Joint Interagency Task Force, the United States Army was put in charge of the the drone threat and counter drone solutions on the behalf of the Pentagon. And then because I was acting director of ATF for a little over a year, we were able to sync very closely with DOJ. And over the last 8 months, we have done incredible work to get our nation to be able to capture the best practices from all over the world, including the Ukrainians. And so since the conflict kicked off, we've been able to purchase at what I would say is lightning speed, 13,000 MIROPS, 10,000 Bumblebees. These are best-in-class systems, and flow them into theater with Ranger Regiment training and 82nd helping to train. And so I am incredibly optimistic that our soldiers are getting what they need going forward to mitigate risk.
If I could add, the Secretary's pushed us really hard, and with, I hope, the support of you all, we can really take a look at our industrial base across the board at all of our depots and how we can ramp this up as fast as possible based off of lessons learned from Ukraine and OEF.
I just want to note, it's so important that we have the capabilities necessary to protect the smaller and less fortified installations like the facility that I mentioned in Kuwait at the port of Shuaibah from drone attacks. Do you believe that we currently have the capabilities necessary to protect those smaller?
Senator, we as a human civilization are at an inflection point for how humans can inflict violence to each other. They can use cell networks. If you look at Operation Spider's Web, what happened deep into Russia, the Ukrainians were able to use about $80,000 worth of drones to, against an adversary in the fight of our lifetime, inflict $8 billion worth of damage. And because you can do these things through cell networks and be thousands of miles away, and the cost of these drones and explosives is so low, this is a problem that all of humanity has to solve. I think that the United States is absolutely, under President Trump and Secretary of War Hex's leadership, at the forefront of doing this. But this is not a problem that can be solved. This is a mitigation of risk that we as humans have to continue to invest in. And we are moving as fast as any people in the world, I believe.
Thank you.
Bozeman and Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. And Secretary Driscoll, I want to thank you for your effort in, as you said earlier, getting our men and women that are out there doing the job, doing a tremendous job, keeping us safe, trying to keep themselves safe, but again, giving them the technology that they need to get us into this century. And this is something that you've just, from the very first day I met you, has been on your mind. And every time I've been around you, either personally or hearing you testify, it is the theme, and I think it'll be a great legacy. So again, thank you for doing that. Also using all of the tools in your toolbox as the Army looks to modernize the industrial base, again, using our capabilities with our various entities. What can Congress do to ease the process and speed up the agreement cycle for the Army with the public-private partnerships, enhanced use leasing, all of those kind of things they're new. They're kind of old but new, and they're out there. They haven't been used very often, and they face all kinds of hurdles.
Senator, this is one of the things we're most excited about.
That means it was a good question.
Oh, it was good. It got me nervous. The enhanced use leases is something we think we can do. The American taxpayer and all of you have allocated to us millions of acres of land for our Army bases, and we have historically underutilized them, and we have been far too reliant on congressionally legislated dollars for us to care for our Army and the communities we're in. And so what we wanted to do is go out to the best of private sector and say, what would you do on these lands? How can you benefit the communities, the soldiers, and their families? And our first test case was a data center in Texas and a data center in Utah. And we know how important compute is going to be and is for the modern fight. And so we should be finalizing those agreements, I think, any week. It may be this week. But then what we did is we went out with an RFI and we basically said, if you're an American company, if you're an American fund, what could you do to partner with us? We've received over 200 submissions. About 120 of them are viable. I would say 50 of them are brand name American companies. And we have partnered with Secretary Besson at Treasury and Russ Vought and OMB, and they have lent us full-time people to go through these proposals. And so what we're hopeful is in about 8 to 10 weeks, we will come back to all of you with 20-ish proposals that we think we can execute on across the country and a plan to work together to expand it.
Good. That's excellent. Very good. General LaNeve, the Army's next generation squad weapon will give soldiers a lethal advantage. In fiscal year 26, Congress allocated $23.7 million to improve the Army's ability to produce primer for the new 6.8 millimeter ammunition. Can you discuss the advantages the next generation squad weapon will provide our soldiers?
Yes, sir, and thank you for the question, sir. I appreciate meeting you the other day.
Very much.
Accuracy, distance, lethality will all, benefit our soldiers. We want to give them the best piece of equipment that overmatches anything that the enemy has. Our soldiers should never go into a fight and have to fight a fair fight. We should always have the equipment that outpaces the threat and the capabilities that the threat has, and we appreciate the support. We're pretty excited about the weapon system. We are making some refinements. We're getting it in the soldiers' hands, and we're getting as much feedback we can from soldiers to be able to continue to tweak it, like we always have with our weapon systems as we're procuring them, so they get the very best weapon system that we can get with American taxpayer dollars, and we appreciate your support, sir.
Well, thank you all, and we do appreciate your service in so many different ways. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Mann.
Chairman, thank you. With Chairman Bozeman in the room, I'll ask my last question first. My colleagues and I have been working on legislation that would expand the use of interagency support agreements for military construction, giving the Army more flexibility to use options beyond the Army Corps of Engineers with the intent to reduce costs, accelerate delivery timelines, and invest in communities surrounding our installations. We've utilized this at Fort Riley in a very successful way, and if we're successful in getting our legislation passed, I would ask each of you if you find that appealing, and it would be something that would be utilized by the Army.
Senator, I think this is one of the most impactful things this committee could do for us this year. We were in North Carolina late last week talking with North Carolina leadership, and we think that there are all sorts of models where we could piggyback off the innovations of your state and meaningfully speed through projects much more cheaply to care for our soldiers and their families. And so I would rank this as a top 3 most important thing for the Army this year.
That's a nice answer. Thank you.
Sir, thank you. We appreciate, and our soldiers appreciate this. We need it.
Thank you. Let me talk about FLORA for a minute. You, Mr. Secretary, and I have had conversations about this topic. This program represents one of the Army's most critical modernization investments. How does the Army plan to integrate the Cheyenne II into future combat aviation brigades, and how are we doing on the necessary funding to get the Cheyenne II into that position?
I'll start first, and then I can hand it to General LaNeve. My impression on the Cheyenne, and somebody the committee should pressure test this, is we are actually doing this new project in the right way. We are spending quickly but very thoughtfully on behalf of the American taxpayer and our soldier. This project is moving forward at lightning speed for a big lift, and it is incredibly important because it is open architecture. It can be flown autonomously. It can integrate new technologies that we don't even know about yet. And so if you think of manned aviation into the future, almost certainly it will need autonomous unmanned solutions in and around it. And FLORA and the Cheyenne are going to be able to do that. And I talk to the CEOs regularly. I'd say at least every 6 weeks we're having a check-in call to make sure we're pacing.
Sure. I think one of the newest piece to the Cheyenne, so we're going to get it into our formation a lot faster. The first one, relatively fast, and then the 4 following that. But right now we have aviators that are training in the simulation. So as soon as we receive the aircraft, they can start flying it right away. So we're not waiting to receive the actual aircraft. We're already learning in here. That's the first piece. The second piece, and the Secretary normally talks about this, and I think it's the most important part about the entire system. And I talked about it in my opening. We're going to be able to upgrade this aircraft in stride just by simple using a USB port inside of this. Completely different than what we've done before. When you get the lifespan of the aircraft and you're like, okay, I gotta find something different. It's a completely new restart. We're really hoping that we can continue to upgrade this in stride. I think it's a complete change in how we look at things.
General, your answer lends itself to my follow-up question, or at least my next question. Cheyenne II represents this generational leap in vertical lift capability, but the program I'm also supportive of is the Black Hawks. There's a fleet of more than 2,100 Black Hawks, and projected FLORA production rates, a full replacement a decade away. That's not a criticism, but it's the scale of what you're facing. And the Army has the opportunity and is balancing this circumstance with the need to modernize and sustain the Black Hawk fleet. What kind of transition do you see? And I want to have you confirm that you know that what I'm talking about on sustaining the Black Hawk.
Sure. Thanks for the question. And we had talked a little bit about this earlier. So, where we're looking the whole aviation transformation initiative, all the decisions that got us to this point were all on the side of Angels, but the landscape's changed a little bit. I look at the Black Hawk, the 47, the Apache as enduring aircraft that are going to be in our formations for a long time, and we have to continue to make sure that we put our soldiers and our pilots in the best aircraft that's available. And then we also have to have the ability to make a leap. So where are we looking of what those numbers actually are? And really, Secretary of War has asked us to take a look at this as well.
Well, one of the things I take pride in is that the efforts at the National Institute of Aviation Research at Wichita State University has been a significant component in the Defense Department, the military's capability of sustaining through digital twinning and then replication, repair, modification, the fleet. And Secretary Driscoll, you visited. I would ask you to encourage the General to join me sometime in Kansas. He tells me he's been there before, and I'd like to have him come back.
And they've been incredible partners. And if you just think about the concept of digitally twinning, that will fundamentally alter how we, the Army, make our budget decisions. It will fundamentally alter how we do the organic industrial base and how we move things through our distribution centers. And it will alter how we fight wars going forward. This has been commonplace in the commercial sector for about 10 to 30 years. We are just catching up. But what you're referencing is an incredibly valuable partner for us as we do that.
My question, which was, would you insist that the general come join me?
Sir, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, for coming up today. The members of the subcommittee will have a week to submit additional questions for the record. Senators may submit additional written questions, and we ask that you respond to those questions within 30 days of receiving them. The subcommittee now stands in recess, subject to the call of the chair.